Always a tricky one. I feel like both of us typically like to have some sort of second year rule where we just kind of rule out players who are coming off a rookie season because so much growth is expected in that scenario already. I
So
think
basically, you're saying apologies to Desmond Bain.
I'm saying apologies to Desmond Bain and I think Cole Anthony as well. I think Anthony has a legitimate case here if
He,
we're allowing for second year players.
I guess what it is, yes, but his baseline was bad, where Desmond Bain was
It was
actually
really
good,
bad.
was good
Yes,
last year
agreed.
for a rookie.
And that's the other tricky part of this award is how do you value a similar size jump from being god awful to mediocre, mediocre to good, and good to great? Like that's always a tricky part of this conversation. I will always argue that a star evolving into a superstar, that's the hardest transition to make. So I personally have always thought that, guys like Steph Curry winning MVP unanimously in 2016, even if he was already Steph Curry, he should have had consideration for that award. Giannis's second MVP should have garnered more most improved player conversation. And so for that reason, I have John Morant at number 3 because he has made that leap. It's obvious watching him play now that he is that guy, just able to get into the paint at will. We've seen the numbers about how he's scoring as many points in the paint as any premier big man, any player, you name him, and he's right up there with him. He's completely transformed the Grizzlies offense into a Morant-centric show that also involves other players. It's made Memphis able to beat teams like the Denver Nuggets back to back. The Grizzlies have arrived a little quicker than anticipated because he is that good. So I had him at number 3 at the expense of just so many players. I mean, you could reasonably have R.J. Barrett, Seth Curry, Anthony Simons, Gary Trent Jr., Cody Martin, Tyus Jones, Harrison Barnes, DeJounte Murray. The list goes on and on. But for me, the top 2 were a little bit more obvious, where I was waffling between Miles Bridges, who just has exploded in Charlotte. They're featuring him within the half court game. They're looking for him in transition. He looks like such a natural beneficiary of LaMelo Ball continuing to improve. And while he might not have made as many strides as like a pure basketball player in terms of just sheer skill, this award tends to center on production increases, whether it's because of that growth or because of an increased opportunity. And I think he's meshing those two together in a way that has allowed him to probably enter the all-star conversation in the Eastern Conference this year. And it was between him and Tyler Herro for me, because Herro, we've talked about him ad nauseum on this podcast, just, the ebbs and flows of how he's perceived and how he's played. But he wasn't that good last year, even if you think that he was a serviceable second year player. And he's that good this year, where he's just been an incredible spark off the bench for the Miami Heat, putting up just scorching, red hot scoring numbers, able to finish around the basket, pull up from mid-range, create his own shots off the bounce from beyond the arc. He's been a capable scorer, just who has put up 17-point quarters and just red hot halves and kept this Miami Heat offense alive even when it's floundered while so much energy is being expended on the defensive end. I ultimately went with Bridges at number 1 and Herro at number 2, but I could easily be convinced to switch that order around.
Yeah, so I did not have Tyler Herro in my top 3. I had John Morant at 3. And if I had to predict, he feels like the player, maybe Miles Bridges would actually be the player I predict to win the award, but because people like to spot those superstar turns and because he has more of a robust track record than anybody here, I think it's probably fair to trust him more over the rest of the season. But he's just scoring better essentially from every level. Remains a great passer, good decision maker after he leaves his feet. He's improved his finishing around the rim statistically, even though he was fine there to begin with. Having being able to rely on the mid-range game, being able to make more threes, that's really opened up the floor for Memphis's offense at a time when Jaren Jackson Jr. has not been at his best to start the year. I had Miles Bridges at number 2, probably would have been at number 1 for me, falling back down to earth in 2 of his 3 last games. For him, his efficiency was through the roof, and it's sort of come down a little bit, but it's still above league average. And his is definitely a case of just doing more. His usage has skyrocketed. He's doing more on the ball. They've upped his post up volume. His step back jumpers aren't flying like they were last year, but like defenses are recognizing that is something that he's going to try. He's thrown some, he's not like the best passer, but he's thrown some audacious passes. There's like, I think he hit Gordon Hayward in transition a few games ago that made me like basically stand up in the middle while I was watching it. So he feels like that type of person where we should have expected if his usage was going to jump this high and it wasn't strictly as a play finisher where LaMelo Ball is setting him up a ton. That's a big deal. Like he has taken on more of that self-creation responsibility. And then at number one, I just had Seth Curry, and like maybe I'm probably just getting wrapped up in the efficiency in the moment. I wouldn't expect him to finish here, but he's shooting over 53% from beyond the arc, almost 67% on drives. He's at over 65% from mid-range. He has an effective field goal percentage of 68.5 on off the dribble jumpers, an effective field goal percentage of 81.5 on catch and shoot jumpers. And he's scoring 2 points per possession in transition. The guy's been molten, and I think you can say that he's been the second best player on what is right now the NBA's best team and best offense. And that's just, when you look at his shot profile, his pull up and like catch and shoot, the share percentages of like his shot attempts, they're pretty similar to last year. He was more of like consigned to that catch and shoot role when he was in Dallas. But to maintain this efficiency, to have your scoring jump from 12.5 points to 17.1, I think what really hurts him is that, he's scoring incredibly efficiently out of the pick and roll, but you can't trust him to run your offense. His assist to turnover ratio is almost 1-to-1 at this point. Feels like he telegraphs a ton of passes. And I know I'm basing it off of what seemed like untenable shooting numbers. If I were to be doing this as a predictive exercise, no, he would not be my selection. This is someone who's age 31. You just don't see this type of swing, like this type of just monster leap. But we did sort of see him broach this type of volume at points in the playoffs last year. So staring at those numbers, which are otherworldly, I have to go with it. Like this is just brass tacks, 50% on threes and 70% on twos, and scoring 17.1 points per game from someone who's had like a journeyman's resume, been more stable since he signed that contract with Dallas. But like even, he hasn't played. Yeah, this will be the first time in his career, if he finishes the season in Philly, that he'll have played back-to-back seasons on the same team, finished it with the same team. So like that's just maybe I'm just flabbergasted by that. Again, I don't know that I would pick him to win the award, but if the season ended today, he'd be my most improved player.
If you arrived at the most improved player discussion in this podcast by using Dan's lovingly crafted timestamps, then go back and listen to the introduction for my full explanation of like why I stayed more away from Seth Curry while fully buying Dan's argument. Like it's a legitimate choice. It is. It's very difficult for me to view it in a 10-game sample, give or take a few games, with those shooting numbers, because as good as he's looked, like it flies in the face of everything we've seen throughout NBA history. We know those aren't sustainable to some degree. And if those come down, like even if this is a snapshot of this moment in time, I feel like even in that snapshot, there's enough sustainability questions for me to not want to have him at number one or really even in my top three. But again, like I totally get it. I also think like the biggest argument against Miles Bridges right now, and a valid reason to have him lower on the ballot, is you can reasonably look at this Charlotte roster and just close your eyes and point to someone and they've probably improved. And I wonder if that cuts into his case a little bit, just that Cody Martin has been so good, that Jalen McDaniels has been so impactful, that LaMelo Ball has taken more strides in the right direction. So does that invalidate his growth by positioning it more as a product of the entire team growing and becoming more competitive?
Yeah, and it was tough to leave Tyler Herro off of this. So when I look at John Morant, the fact that he's made the statistical jump that he has, like to me, it's harder to go from 19 points per game to 25 points per game than it is to go from 15 to 21, which is the jump that Tyler Herro has made. And the other thing is, I know there have been games that Kyle Lowry has missed, but like having Jimmy Butler, having Kyle Lowry, having Bam Adebayo on your team, even though you're not spending all of your time with those players since you're coming off the bench, The fact that you are coming off the bench, to me, matters. Ja Morant's not coming off the bench. Seth Curry's not coming off the bench. And he's doing it on a team that's been more decimated than I think anyone expected. You could still, there's talent around him. I'm not trying to, I don't like, I hate when I get into this case of penalizing Tyler Herro for this, but that did factor into when I was looking at that final spot, because Seth Curry's efficiency is just, 10 games is 10 games, but I can't remember who had this stat. I heard it on the Dunked On podcast, though. Seth Curry, I might have just called him Steph Curry, has the highest true shooting percentage of anyone averaging at least 10 field goal attempts per game in NBA history through this much of the season. And so that's just, again,
that feels good.
It's all right. I guess
Decent,
it's fine.
I would say.